Now it is 10 o'clock and it is time for Sunday Morning Live at All Saints Church. I'm going to go ahead and put spotlight my video. There we are. Hey, everybody. Preciados amigos y amigas, que alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la iglesia de todos los santos. Dear friends, what a joy it is for us to be together at All Saints Church this morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Live at All Saints Church. It's phenomenal to be here. Obviously wish we could all be together. And we're together in this way. It's not physical, and it is incredibly real. And so glad wherever you are that you are a part of this. Want to give you a couple announcements of things that are continuing to go on in the life of All Saints Church. Our Sunday morning food table continues. It's slightly different. Thanks to Erica Tamblin and Marilyn Kaufman and so many people who have been donating Ralph's gift cards. We gave out 91 $10 Ralph's gift cards this morning at All Saints Church, as well as 45 masks. If you want to donate Ralph's gift cards, you can mail them to All Saints at 132 North Euclid in Pasadena. Or if you're out already, please do not make a special trip. But if you're already out on an essential errand, you can drop them through the mail slot by the door facing the quad lawn. And I went in and we had $350 worth of mail cards this morning that people had dropped through there. So thank you. Every Sunday we have what we call a partner in love here at All Saints Church. This is someone in our community, an organization that is doing incredible work for those who are the most vulnerable during this pandemic. And we're thrilled that our partner in love this morning is the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles' One Body and One Spirit emergency appeal. This is going to be used to assist congregations, schools, affiliated institutions, and their employees most deeply affected by the pandemic and related economic crisis. In the chat and on Facebook, there'll be a link to donate. Please give as generously as you can. And then also, please continue to give to support All Saints Church. Your gift to All Saints is as important as it has ever been, as we are committed to keeping our whole staff employed through 2020. And we're committed to our prioritizing of the most vulnerable in our community. And your giving makes that happen. Part of our Ministry of Courageous Justice is that we're going to be holding a Red Cross blood drive, not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday, May 12th from 10 to 4 p.m. here at All Saints. Donations are by appointment only, scheduled through redcrossblood.org. Information about that is going in the chat feature. And then also ask you to continue to support Learning Works Food Pantry. You can drop off any non-perishable food items, diapers, wipes, formula. They also need milk and eggs. Drop those off at Learning Works, 90 North Daisy Avenue in Pasadena at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. daily. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our diocesan bishop, the 7th Bishop of the Diocese of Los Angeles, John Harvey Taylor. Before Bishop Taylor was bishop, he served as vicar of St. John Chrysostom Church and School in Rancho Santa Margarita. He is the son of journalists, has a family connection to us here at All Saints Church, and also served as chief of staff to former President Richard Nixon, and later as the executive director of the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California. And welcome to Sunday Morning Live at All Saints Church, Bishop. And I know you just wanted to start off with some words for us, so I'm just going to have Keith pitch it over to you, say welcome, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Mike. It is a joy beyond words to be with you this morning. First of all, it is indeed my dear beloved mother Jean's church, and it was therefore my church for many years. Jean and her second husband repose cheerfully upstairs in the columbarium. But it's also a blessing to be with All Saints and the saints of All Saints, because you have been leaders during this wilderness time. First of all, making virtual Eucharistic worship work, which relatively few of our churches have tried. As Mike's announcements, I think, evince clearly, All Saints is continuing to remain united in fellowship and service. And I'm particularly grateful for Mike's personal prophetic witness during this time. And I'll talk more about that at 11:15 for those of us who are still present by then. But suffice it to say that Mike's voice has been a clear one, giving us all permission to feel and experience whatever we're feeling and experiencing. A permission not to be some ideal version of ourselves during this health and economic catastrophe, but to be exactly who we are. And to find a way, and this is the essential thing sometimes about ministry, to be able to find a way to own who we are and what we feel, and turn that into ministry and evangelism and the work of perfect freedom. So thank you all, saints, and thank you, Mike. I want to talk maybe for 10 or 15 minutes to start. And then I think Mike has some questions, and I pray that all of those here gathered will have some questions. But first, I want to talk a little bit sheepishly about work that the Spirit has finished for us. In our wisdom, late last year, we, your servants in diocesan leadership, had fixed on our 2020 theme for the year, and especially for convention in November. And the theme was servanthood. And here's how we had construed it before the middle of March. First of all, Christian life is, in its essence, self-sacrificial, and it was good to find ways to re-examine that. Second, the Christian life is rooted ideally not in hierarchy, but in mutuality. And third, we wanted to, for the sake of our colleagues in what's sometimes inelegantly called the vocational diaconate, we wanted to talk again about how the only ordained order that Jesus even hinted at was the diaconate. He didn't talk about priests and bishops, but he did tell his apostles that by becoming servants to one another, they would manifest the reality of God in a cruel and unbelieving world. So that was as far as we had gotten by the middle of March. And then COVID-19 came. We had this experience. And so now what's happened is this abstract notion of perpetual self-sacrifice has been thrust upon us. And a whole society is being invited to sacrifice what it loves. There is a Christ-like self-sacrifice by the many for the sake of the few, those most at risk. Second, oh, how are relationships not rooted in healthy mutuality? People serving one another within a system. You serving me, I serving you. How relationships not so construed are being tested. And finally, the bishops and priests are all having their worlds rocked. Have we not, Mike, Susan, Sally, and Alfredo, have we not shed our raiment, our finery, while re-embracing our diaconal vows? So now we know why we picked servanthood. Some students of the late Phyllis Tickle remember her saying that we would get a Reformation, we Christians, every 500 years, whether we want one or not. So here we have our moment of potential reformation. The Church of Christ will master this moment by becoming the servant of this moment, the student of what our advocate, the Spirit, teaches us. By accepting as individuals and institutions that the progressive denominational church, a kind of inelegant definition of what we collectively are part of in the Episcopal Church and in the diocese, that the progressive denominational church has been prepared for these times. Now, beyond this, both for reasons of time and also for reasons of the value of mutuality and of shared listening to the Spirit, it is not for me to say too much more. It is for the Spirit in her wisdom to reveal the rest of the story. But I will go so far as to identify the three charisms that I believe have been prepared for us in the Episcopal Church for this moment. The first is justice. Do we not see holes in the health and economic safety net, which are intolerable, not regrettable, not unfortunate, but intolerable. Who better prepared than us to say? Our second charism is mystery. In the Acts reading that's been set for today's Eucharistic worship, we learn of the early disciples' reverent fear, a fear of a benevolence and love in the temperament of God so vast that we can only quiver in fear before it. Such benevolence is never twinned with power, except in the courts of the divine. And our third charism is the charism of unity. And again, we'll hear from Acts today about everyone sitting at the table, everyone, however they've been formed and called and fashioned, everyone draped in the raiment of baptismal apostolic leadership, each of us at the table. And in the unity piece, a brief plug, if I may, for Canon Russell's One in the Spirit initiative. This is our grasping for our familial unity as a diocesan family of God. We knew it was the right thing to do, but now we know why, because of these times and these circumstances. And also in the area of unity, there's a broader unity, and if all people of faith do not hear this, I'd be surprised. There is an opportunity here for a new ecumenism, a new practical interfaith relationship among all communities of faith that stand in opposition to the world as it is, as we see it functioning politically, economically, and culturally, I might say, under-functioning. And at least for me, in some preliminary discussions we're having with conversation partners in our diocesan region, during this year in particular, a unifying theme and issue for communities of faith has got to be voter empowerment. The more people participate in the mechanisms of free societies, the more a civic spirit blows, which is akin to the akin to the Holy Spirit. And we're going to be working hard, and already are, to try to forge some relationships across some difficult ecumenical and interfaith divisions to try to bring this about. For the rest of the time of my prepared remarks, and to perhaps stimulate some discussion, I want to give the people of All Saints a foretaste of what the way forward looks like in the next phase of quarantine as we continue in this Easter time to do all we can to keep tombs empty. And these 4 points, which I'll sort of read to you, but they'll be promulgated in writing tomorrow in the form of a pastoral letter. These are the 4 principles that I've given our deans, the heads of our 10 regional groupings. Our diocese is far flung. It is parts of 6 counties, 5 counties, and then part of Riverside County. It goes from way up in Santa Barbara County down to the border of San Diego County. It goes from the Pacific to the Colorado River in Needles. So we're a vast diocese, but we are one as we move forward together in the next phase of the quarantine. The first principle, my siblings in Christ, is that diocesan policy will conform strictly to state of California policy. The safety of the people of God will be our paramount value in deciding how it is that churches begin to move back toward in-person worship. And I think we all know that Governor Newsom has put organized faith communities in phase 3. We don't know when, but we do know what the governor will need to know in terms of testing and in terms of contact tracing to feel comfortable enough to begin to move to phase 3. And in the meantime, we'll be working with our deans and listening to all of you to talk about what the next phase of quarantine will look like as we move back toward in-person worship. Here's the second one. And to a community that's mastered virtual Eucharistic worship, this one is important to hear. Since some opportunity to be together again for worship is likely to precede clarity and confidence about serving the physical elements in a safe way and a theologically sound way, we're going to give some consideration to using daily office liturgies at first when we come back together. And here's why I say that. If there's one thing I could say to summarize what's happening in the Episcopal Church at all levels, it's a fear of the Rube Goldberg devices that we'll have to dream up to serve the actual bread and the wine in person to people in a way that everybody perceives is safe. We can devote so much energy to that we will, without meaning to, make this blessed, peace-inducing thing scary. And I think there's some fear in the presiding bishop's office that if we let that happen, we could actually break Holy Eucharist. We could end up injuring the thing and losing our practice. And so what we're hearing from the presiding bishop's office is, let's put fellowship first. If it's possible for people to come back together in certain numbers according to carefully discerned state policy rooted in principles of science and safety, maybe agonize later about what to do about the bread and the wine. Just give thanks for the opportunity to be together. The third principle is also one that I think will be of interest to All Saints, which is a large and thriving community in an urban neighborhood. Even if smaller churches in less dense communities could open sooner, think about desert churches, smaller churches in the suburbs, mountain churches. Even if they could open sooner, it would be healthier spiritually for the whole body if all of our churches came back to public worship, however it's permitted, at the same time. We're going to test that value and say to folks, say in Apple Valley or Orange County or the mountains, how good do you feel about being able to go back to church when your siblings in Pasadena and Los Angeles can't yet? And before I finish, the fourth principle, possibly the most important. In recovering what we love, we should be sure to claim all we've learned, the technology, the deepening relationship, and especially the indications we're getting about how the worship we're offering online are attracting new pilgrims, people who are spiritually hungry and perhaps didn't even know it. They're coming to our services. They're participating in our worship, which is now 7 days a week rather than just on Sunday, as it is in many of our churches. So there is an amazing thing being discovered. We want the church later in this pandemic experience, to the extent possible, not to be either or, not to go back to the way it was, but to see what the new church is, rooted in both and. A blessing to be with you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Bishop, thank you so much. There's so much there, and appreciate you being with us. I've got a couple of things I just want to kick around with you. And I know you who are out there watching, you might have questions. There is a Q&A feature. And so if you have a question for Bishop Taylor, just use the Q&A feature and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can. Bishop, you started off by saying, talking about the importance of being able to just sort of feel what you're feeling at this point. I just want to ask, how are you doing? How has this been for you and for your family? Just like, how are you doing through all this?
Oh, Mike, you're kind to ask. Not to make it overly personal, but my charism is cheerfulness. And so and I know that, I get it. I was gifted with a relatively happy temperament, and I have that at a time when we are absolutely surrounded by degrees of trauma, especially that being experienced by those suffering from and losing those whom they love to the disease. But in a country that's on the way to having 40 million unemployed, I think it's all important for us to be aware of the trauma of economic deprivation. And that is, I think, something that's sort of magnifying our sense of righteous anger at the lack of attentiveness in advance to what a pandemic, epidemic safety net would look like for individuals, and indeed for employers who employ people who depend on their salaries to feed their families. And so, it's not that it's been sort of without impact on me. I have been less than focused intellectually, as isolation sometimes does. But this last week, I sort of had this feeling of, I think I've taken enough of this under the hood that I feel as though I'm moving back toward being able to function optimally, more or less. But the important thing for each of us, and Canon McCarthy, the canon of the ordinary, is kind of my consigliere at St. Paul's Commons, as well as the chief of staff of St. Paul's Commons. Something she's been stressing is that after natural disasters, generally they happen sort of in a day or in a moment. There's kind of a heroic period, and then there's a period of disorientation and discouragement. And in this particular natural disaster, which continues to unfold, that period of disorientation and discouragement is likely to continue for all of us for a long time. And so there are very, very important things for us to teach one another about not holding ourselves to too high a standard, to not expecting ourselves to function as we did before, to get plenty of rest, get plenty of water, get plenty of exercise, be as joyful as you can, indulge yourself a little bit. I'll talk about this in my sermon, 11:15. Take care of yourself so you can take care of the people around you, and then trust in resurrection and trust in the Spirit to lead us forward. And take care of yourself, and take care of yourself by taking care of others. That's always been the all saints algebra, and the whole church needs it now.
So you mentioned and I'm putting this up on the screen, this is the emotional life cycle of a disaster that Canon McCarthy was using. And sorry, can you see that, Bishop?
Yeah.
On your screen? And so like on this, we're sort of probably in the disillusionment time, maybe getting to sort of the working through grief. Is that, and given that, we're all going to be in different places at different times.
Yeah, and I'd forgotten the terms, and so I'm glad to hear this. What I referred to as disorientation is actually the disillusionment phase, and it's an especially disempowering one. Coming to terms is the thing that will come to each of us in different ways. I'm aware in my own temperament of experiencing something that feels a little bit like coming to terms and reconstruction. In other words, if Jesus came and said to all of us, you know what, it's going to look like this for a while. I feel as though I could contend with it. This is a psychological expression rather than a socio-political one. The difficulty is my narrative is radically different from the narratives of millions and millions of people. I have not had an interruption in my income. I practice a vocation that I can do on a screen, on a MacBook, using Zoom. But millions and millions of our siblings are in a completely different place and are experiencing an anticipation of something which could look like the Great Depression, which is why ultimately some interfaith ecumenical witness is going to be absolutely vital. However this thing unfolds, however reconstruction occurs economically and culturally, people of faith have got to advocate for those who are unheard.
So absolutely. So on that, looking at maybe something global and local, first, are there any conversations happening yet in the Anglican Communion about how we can help countries that don't have the healthcare infrastructure of the West? And then also locally, I know one of your passions that we share is ending homelessness. Are you seeing new opportunities or partnerships emerging from this pandemic for us to move forward on that?
Mike, I'm going to give you an absolutely honest answer. In the institutional church, what I'm experiencing most of all is a regrouping phase, a reorientation phase, with the principal challenge being, what do we do about physical worship in our churches? This is, I think, consuming most of people's energy, and we're going to have to get beyond that if we're going to fulfill our prophetic obligations during this period. Now, for a church like All Saints, one might think in terms of relationships with communities nearby. One thinks of St. Barnabas, Pasadena, whose history is inextricably tied up with All Saints, Church of the Angels, St. Edmunds, Holy Trinity and St. Benedict in Alhambra, probably 50 minutes drive from All Saints. An interesting community where not only the rector's spouse, but 50 members of the congregation work directly in healthcare, most of them as nurses. So we have neighbors who have absolutely been on the front lines. So there's always that sort of concentric ripples that sort of go out as one makes contact in one's own neighborhood. I think the thing that concerns me most about the global impact of the pandemic, especially as we begin to receive reports of outbreaks in Africa, is the capacity of the industrial West at its best and at its most benevolent, which at the moment we are not, but the sheer economic capacity of the world of privilege is going to need to be marshaled in terms of trillions and trillions of dollars for the sake of the less privileged. We have that obligation locally. We have that obligation globally. In terms of housing, the concern I have the most, and there's been some journalism about that, is that the solution of greater density in terms of developments is likely to be interfered with by pandemic anxiety. And I continue to think that for the diocese, the most important work is going to be done institution by institution at those 20 to 30, perhaps more churches that have some property that can be leveraged for the glory of God and the care of God's people for housing projects.
Thank you. That's great. I'm just going to jump to some of the questions that we're getting. We're getting some really great questions in Q&A. Marcus King asked, have you considered a hybrid service that allows the same technology to be used and have some in-person attendance?
That's a great question, and it's one of the things that I think is likely to be inevitable. We're likely to hear from the governor. One doesn't want to predict or read the state's mind, but we're likely to hear that gatherings of X and below are now permissible. So for a church, say that X is 50. Given social distancing, hygiene, and all the things that we're all going to have to do when we come together in any setting. Say that number is 50. It's going to be a lot easier for St. Timothy's Apple Valley to be able to have a relatively normal Sunday routine than it is for All Saints. And so it's possible that, to the extent that we're able to say that we're not going to let smaller communities necessarily open sooner. We're basically going to figure out how to go forward together. The hybrid solution is likely to be one that we'll fix on, so that there can be a group of people organizing worship, maybe even attending worship, with the service then continuing to be live streamed. And that for weddings, for funerals, for ordinations. We have ordinations coming up in June. We're pledged to try to get our half dozen or so candidates for the transitional diaconate ordained on schedule, but that is inevitably going to involve a hybrid solution. And we're not clear about what it's going to look like because we don't yet know what phase 3 is going to look like. But even if phase 3 doesn't come by mid-June when the ordinations are, there may be a way, even under the current stay-at-home requirement, which does permit a couple of people to be in church doing a service. Mm-hmm. There could be ways we could do that, in part by moving the ordinations around and having one ordination. Say there are 6 people, we could have 6 sites for ordinations. So, but a hybrid solution is almost inevitably going to be in store.
Right, thank you. Steve Williams asked, Bishop, how do we look at end-of-life trauma issues that have come up when we don't have opportunities to be with loved ones at the end of life? And how do we hold each other's hands when we can't hold each other's hands?
Either I could give you a half-baked answer, or Sally Howard could give you a deeply, deeply felt, discerned, expert answer.
I don't know if Sally is on. What I will say, and Sally, jump in if you're around.
Sure, I'm here.
Why don't you go ahead, Sally, and jump in?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question, and we are, continuing to try to build skills of, both supporting our healthcare workers who are frontline in those situations and standing in to be family and to be chaplains in those situations where we can't be with people. And we know that, one of the most effective ways of keeping a trauma from becoming an entrenched post-traumatic stress pattern really is to have loving support, empathic support around you. And so I think even supporting those that do have loved ones that they can't be with, is really helping stop trauma from becoming something that is long-lasting. And we continue to explore how can we, hospital by hospital, how can we be present in those situations. So that's a short answer, I would say.
Yeah, and I'll thank you so much, Sally, and you and the congregational response team and congregational care team have been working so hard on issues just like this, along with our lay counselors. Want to highlight some work that's going on in Pittsburgh. Reverend Dr. Dan Hall. Dan is a surgeon and an Episcopal priest working at the VA hospital in Pittsburgh. He is working with both the VA and with the diocese on protocols that will allow clergy to go into hospitals to say, what will this be to keep, to have as safe as possible clergy to go in to be with people. And if clergy can go in, there may be a step that happens, but that will allow other folks to go in. Everything, of course, the challenges has to be done with public health primarily in mind. We have parishioners right now who are going in for surgery whose loved ones can't be with them, and it's really hard and painful. And that's why I think also us being a community of prayer together, praying for each other, is so important. And so when we're saying these names on our prayer list, just really pray those names because that's part of how we can be together again. Bishop Michael asks, you want to jump in, Sally?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in our community, and I am trusting and sure that this is true across, the whole diocese, but, the lay leadership and laity has stepped in to also be with families just in remarkable ways. So part of that congregational response team you're talking about, Mike, is infused by the power of the laity.
Mike, if I may, to this wonderful question about end-of-life relationship, I want to append a brief reflection on course-of-life relationship, only to say that if there is one consistent vein of everything I'm learning at every level of the church about how people are experiencing this time, it is a deepening of relationship. For whatever reason, because of the way our culture and society were behaving before, there was an extent to which even in the church, our relationships tended to be a bit superficial. But over and over again, one hears of people having conversations on the phone that are deeper and richer than any conversations that occurred at coffee hour. Every Zoom meeting I'm in now has a personal piece, a check-in piece, and these meetings are far, in their way, far warmer sometimes than our meetings have been incarnationally. And I want us to make sure we capture that. And learn what that tells us about the power of empathy and relationship. And then through the powerful prism that Canon Russell and her colleagues are putting together in the One in the Spirit initiative, take it across difference, particularly geographic, age, socioeconomic, but also language and ethnicity, gender orientation, identification. Take that, what we're learning about the power of deepening relationship, and apply it in this new Reformation phase. So it's one of the unanticipated benefits of a dark time that I want us not to lose in our quest to get back to normal. Because if normal is superficial and divided, we won't have learned anything.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time, I think, for maybe one more question. Michael Duran asks, can you help me reconcile the emotional, social, economic wealth in my personal life with the inner struggle I feel with feelings of sadness and anger? And I think a lot of us are feeling, being held in these tensions in our lives.
What a wise question. Because each of us is being wounded by this. And privilege might cushion, but privilege doesn't heal. And those of us, and most of us probably in this conversation this morning, according to on a global scale, can be reckoned as relatively privileged. But that doesn't mean we're not hurting. And it doesn't mean we're not entitled to we shouldn't feel ashamed of our discouragement as though we don't deserve to, because others are suffering more. But once we've owned what we're feeling, and this is why I so much appreciate Mike's daily memes, because it's all about this. It's all about how every one of us is experiencing this differently, but we're all hurting. And the Christian algebra, the All Saints algebra, is to take that sort of universal understanding of the way the cross functions in every life, and then take that, and should we be so blessed as to have privilege and to have resources, find a way to make resurrection live for ourselves and for others by sharing it. And I know you're all already doing it, but I also give yourself permission to be angry and discouraged, and especially conscious of the corrosiveness of situational depression and of the lure of potentially addictive behavior. Those of us who have got alcoholism, codependence in our families of origin, as I do, we got to be aware of it when our defenses are down. Addiction has been waiting for an opportune time, and for some folks, this might be it. Isolation is therefore a particular enemy in this time. So what we can also do with our sense of feeling isolated is to reach out and make somebody else feel less isolated. Thank you. I want to throw one more in here that's just sort of flows from that, and it's from Stephen. Says, hello, I'm questioning my faith. Wondering if you could tell me what to do. And before I turn it over to you, I would just sort of say, Stephen, first of all, welcome to the club. It's a big one. And All Saints Church is all about it. And I hope you keep coming together with us, because we're going to find a lot of us in different times questioning our faith. And so glad that you brought your questions here. Bishop, how would you respond to Stephen? There is there's a rationalistic, intellectual response to that, which I will leave off to the side. What I would say is to Stephen is to feel it. Don't run from it, run toward it. But make sure that you correlate it with the other things you're experiencing. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you're feeling especially isolated, if you're feeling a deeper than usual sense of discouragement, correlate those possibilities with what your theological disposition is. If it's just that, well, I'm questioning my faith because this is happening, well, the sort of the intellectual answer is, well, look at all the crappy stuff that happened to a whole kit and caboodle of people the last 2 years all around the world, and that didn't make me question my faith. But that's probably not what you're dealing with, Stephen. You're dealing with a passionate human response to an overwhelming sense of darkness, uncertainty, maybe even a sense of anger at the injustice of it. Keep saying your prayers, keep getting plenty of exercise, keep drinking plenty of water, and keep being part of the communities of faith and support that you've got, including this one, because as Mike said, we're all feeling it, and we'll just lift each other up through it.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask if you could close us in prayer. There's a couple questions still in the Q&A. Bishop, if you have a few minutes between now and when we get going with Children's Chapel and service, you might want to, you can type in answers to that if you want to. And Bishop, would you close us in prayer?
Gracious and loving God, when Jesus came among his frightened disciples, he terrified them by saying that he was leaving them, and he told them that there were things that he couldn't tell them because he couldn't bear to hear them. And God, if you would come to this community of faith, if you'd come to all these individuals, these families, these people following their vocations and doing their ministry and hugging their grandchildren and caring for one another, if you told them in January that May would look like this, they would not have been able to bear or absorb the news. And yet here we are, gracious God, your pilgrims still on the way together. Help us to see the grace of this moment and all of our moments and all of the work that our resurrection faith enables us to do when we're reminded how free we are. To those of us who struggle, give the grace of the support and love of this community. For those of us who have some grace to bear, may we find ways to share it and pour it out like balm, so that the whole community of faith might go forward together and be a light to the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Bishop, thank you so much. And please know that we are holding you and Bishop Bruce and Canon McCarthy and the whole diocesan staff in prayer daily, if not hourly. Are deeply grateful for everything that you're doing and for who you are.
And thank you.
Thank you. And we have, so we're going to take a little bit of a break. Children's Chapel with Kelly Aaron O'Phelan is going to be starting at 11. So get your candle and something to light it ready. Our Eucharist and Bishop Taylor will be back with us as a preacher at 11:15. And then a reminder, next week, we're excited to have Scott Budnick with us in the forum. Scott is the producer of the Hangover movies, but that's not probably why we're having him here. After producing those movies, Scott left Hollywood for a while, began to work in criminal justice reform and trying to dismantle mass incarceration, and then was one of the people who teamed up with Brian Stevenson on the movie Just Mercy. And so we're going to be chatting with Scott about mass incarceration, particularly during COVID-19, and the work that he and Brian have shared in that movie, and of course with your questions. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. We'll see you again at 11 o'clock with Children's Chapel, so stick around.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all.
Thanks.